This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, let's get started. Good morning to you. I'm Bruce Verdon. I'm the Program Director for the Bay Area Climate Adaptation Network, or BayCAN. This is webinar number 3 this morning. We're starting at just about 11, and we're slated to run till 12:30, but that will depend on how much discussion we have on these two items. Welcome. Thank you for muting your phones. We have more than 20 people and more joining every minute here, so we'll have a good turnout, and hope you're having a good Tuesday here. So we have two items on the agenda. Let me just click. And by the way, I'm going to not use full screen presenting mode, and you'll see why in a minute, so you can see the kind of product that we're going to give you with the slide deck more clearly. We have two items for the agenda, pretty simple today. One, we're going to make the debut of the BayCAN Slide Deck version 1.0. We have about 50 slides to show you today, some different types of slides. And what we want to do with this webinar, why we're having it, is to get some feedback from you, which kinds of slides that we're showing you examples of today, the first set of 45 or 50, which kinds would be most helpful to you. And because this is going to be a living slide deck, we are going to add to it on a monthly basis from our end and push those notices about new slides out to you. We're going to solicit your slides and images on a regular basis. And the third thing we're going to do is solicit your needs for slides so that we can put some together or go out and find them for you. So this is basically a climate service that we're running. And so it's a good segue that we'll have into the discussion in the second part of this webinar today about creating more of a formal climate kind of extension service for the region. And we'll talk about what that could look like. We'll get some of your feedback today on that concept. We'll talk about how there are a number of groups and organizations in the Bay Area that would like to provide or are providing some version of climate extension services, climate support services for local governments like BayCAN is doing. And how do we align and coordinate those different services so it works for you, the local governments, the cities, the counties, the water districts, the special districts that make up BayCAN. So that is our agenda. You can give us feedback today in 3 ways on both agenda items 1 and 2. One, you can use the chat function on the GoToMeeting screen. Secondly, you can unmute yourself when and thank you for muting yourself now, but you can unmute yourself when we get to the discussion section and talk to everyone live and direct. And third, you can send an email, and so there is my email, bruce@baycanadapt.org, and that's where you can send an email, and we'll get to those. We won't read them here on the air, but we'll get to them later and put those in the record as well. So this is all about getting your feedback on both the slide deck and on the extension services. So with that, let's get started on looking at the slide deck. And as I said, I'm not going to put this in full screen mode so that you can see that we're going to give you not only slides, but notes with the slides so that you can use them in the proper manner. So most of the slides that we're going to be showing you today in version 1.0 come from the San Francisco Bay Area Region Report that was done as part of the California Fourth Assessment last year. You can see on the screen the key authors for that report. There were about 25 contributing authors and a number of reviewers. And you can find this report and all of the other 8 regional reports, the 3 topical reports on tribal, indigenous, and indigenous communities on oceans and coasts and on climate justice. Those are the 3 topical reports, and the statewide summary. And there's more, 51 technical reports, all that were done for the California Fourth Assessment last year, and they're all at this website, that you see on the screen. The slide deck that we're going to show you, just the V1.0 with something like 45 or 50 slides, has these categories for now. There'll be some summary slides. 2, 3, and 4, and 5 are about specific aspects of Bay Area climate. Number 6, we'll try out on you some emerging themes from the regional report and see how you like that kind of thing, and would that be helpful? Then 7, we have a few examples of Bay Area solutions. Obviously, there are hundreds of them. We have a few here to, again, get your feedback. Would more slides about solutions, in this case, be helpful? And then there are just some image slides at the end just to get that feedback too. Would it be helpful just to put some images together that you could use and that would be helpful for you in terms of communication? And that's the whole point here. The point is to help with this BayCAN service so our members can talk about various subjects with more authority, talking to your boards, talking to your elected officials, talking to your staff, to give you slides and science that have been blessed and approved basically by BayCAN, so that you know that you can trust that they will be good, solid science about our region and about California. Sourced, they're from reputable sources, things that you can trust again. So those are the categories. Let's look at the first, that's 2, 3, 4, and 5, where we've got, or actually with summary slides is first. So summary slides, I'm not sure about slides with this much text, but we'll leave that to you. But here are 3 slides that you can use that summarize the key headlines in the Bay Area report. And the first one being that we're already seeing climate change, as you know, in the region, and here's some science to go with that about temperature, fog, sea level rise, drought, and fire season. So that's the first headline. The second one, in terms of summary slides, some top headlines on temperature and precipitation, how much they're projected to change going forward. So a headline on temperature, one on precipitation, on booms and busts, another one about drought and temperature, another one about the snowpack. So just again, some very high level headlines from the report that you can use. And then the third of these summary slides is about sea level rise, and again, 3 of the big headlines from the report about how much sea level rise is currently the official projection for California from the 4th assessment. This possibility or plausibility physically of much more, maybe as much as 10 feet even by the end of the century, and then about the inevitability of getting more sea level rise over the next few centuries going ahead. So these summary slides, again, are meant to give you some headlines to work with. We aren't going to ask that you use these slides just as they are. We're interested in helping you move forward. So as long as you stick to the science that we have here, obviously we're not going to send someone around to watch what you're doing, but we'd ask that you stick to the wording that's here because it's been fairly carefully put together to represent the science. So those are some summary slides, and then we have the next sections are all about specific ideas. And I'm going to run through these, and then we'll take some feedback, and then we'll look at some of the other types of slides we have. So hotter temperatures, and again, you can see at the bottom, we're going to give you notes with these to explain, because some of these data points and scientific presentations of the materials, are a bit dense. Or filled with acronyms, 4.5, 8.5, RCPs, all these various things. So we're going to try and provide you in the notes to each slide what's behind what you're seeing on the screen. So example, with this one and a slide about hotter temperatures coming by mid-century and then going on further, it talks about the different climate scenarios that are represented here, the 2 the 8.5 and the 4.5, and a bit of what they mean, why there's not much difference between them between now and 2050, and then there's an increasing distance between the two scenarios as you go forward, that kind of thing. So those kinds of things will be here in the notes. We won't just be throwing slides at you and say, good luck. So let's see, why is this not? Let's go to the next one. So here's another one, a map that came again from the Bay Area Region Report. This is about the hottest day of the year instead of average temperature, which the previous one was. So again, and some notes here on how to use this and kind of what's the point of this slide. This is something that we made, and maybe you've used CalAdapt as well. This did not come from the regional report. It came from CalAdapt, where you can go to CalAdapt, and we've given you the instructions here on how you can create a very hot day, extremely hot day temperature graph for a given city, for your city. So this is an example one that I did from Berkeley, since that's where I work. But we've given you again the instructions here on how to create this kind of thing. And there are other types of charts you can also create at CalAdapt. This is just the one that we picked on for now. So that's another type of thing that we can do. Instead of just saying, hey, go to CalAdapt and make your own slides. We could, if it's helpful to you, provide instructions and kind of a little how-to guide that might make it easier for you to do that kind of thing. Here's another one that came from a recent study that is, again, the kind of thing we can do. We can pull from recent studies that were not part of the regional report. And here was an interesting one, I think, where they looked at climate zones and matched up a current place like Eureka with what's Eureka's climate going to be like given the projections of a high emission scenario by the end of the century. And Eureka in this case would be more like Berkeley, and Berkeley would be more like Santa Ana, and on down. Burbank would be more like Fresno. You get the idea. And we found that these kinds of things can take it out of the numbers and science realm and make it more real for people. This is, again, the kind of thing we could dig up if these types of slides would be helpful to you. Fog decline. Fog is a big issue that we talk about in the report. And so here's a slide for today with some of the science on the left in the text, and then a chart to go with it from one of the studies that was referenced in the regional report. So again, this is the kind of thing we can do based on the regional report and based on other scientific studies, is pull out the key headlines, find an illustration for them, and present that again as a package with a source for you and all. Looking at precipitation, drought, and snowpack, which is another of our kind of specific heading chapters. One of the big headlines, obviously, looking ahead for the Bay Area and for California, is we may not have too much of a difference in terms of total precipitation year to year average, but we are going to have more very wet years, more and more very dry years. So the kind of boom and bust syndrome here, we talk about that again in the notes to this slide. And what we've tried to do in the notes is refer you to page numbers in the big report or to the study that they're referring to, so that you can see when you need more info, and you may, you can read the entire, couple of pages of text on this topic and not just the headline that we've pulled out from the report with a couple of images. Hope that makes sense. Let's just run through a few more of these. Atmospheric rivers in the news a lot lately, and so here's a bit of discussion from the report about what AR events are and an illustration to go with it, so that you can talk about it with some authority, even though you may not be a scientist. Drought, again, here's typical slide on drought with the typical kind of color-coded chart for California that was in the midst of the big drought, the 2011 to 2016 drought. So again, we'll give you images, we'll give you headlines that will go with it, and give you some explanations so that you can work with that in a comfortable way. Here's a very good one from the report. an image and a couple of headlines about what's happening and what's going to happen with the shrinking Sierra and snowpack. And again, we've tried to refer you back to the report here for more info, but to give you the gist of what is what the projection is and what we're looking at, literally. Here's another one on Sierra snowpack, and this is the kind of thing we could also do. This is more background material, but if you look at this slide, it's a pie chart of Bay Area water for the 9 counties and what are the sources. And you can see the 2 big ones at the bottom, the Tuolumne for the San Francisco watershed and for San Francisco's partners that get water through the city system, South Bay and Peninsula in particular, and the McCollum, which is East Bay Mud's big system. But then you see the others, the percentage of water supplies that are surface water and groundwater. That's the green. That's a lot of Marin and Sonoma, but other places as well where it's not primary as it is in Marin and Sonoma in terms of local supplies. And then State Water Project and Central Valley Water Project, and both those feed both into a number of the systems and services we have here. So this kind of background we can provide and help you with. People don't really get, for the most part, where our water comes from here. They may know their own, but they certainly don't know anybody else's. Wildfires, just to kind of quickly go through this, we've got just one on wildfires. We could obviously can and will do more, but this is the kind of thing that we can show you a table from the regional report that listed the Bay Area parts of the largest 20 fires in California. This one's already outdated because it was through 2017, but maybe we can make up a new chart that would reflect, unfortunately, the bigger fires that even happened in 2018 here on the edge of the Bay Area, and the smoke that infiltrated most of the Bay Area. So that's wildfires. Lots we can do there. Sea level rise. Finally, big topic, obviously, for this region. And here are some examples, again, of the kinds of things we can do. Take a chart or graph. This is from the Ocean Protection Council. On the right, it's referred to in our report, and give you 3 of the big headlines around sea level rise, about projections going forward, about this possibility or physical plausibility of much more. In terms of ice sheet melting Antarctica and Greenland and all of that. And again, some explanation below with some references to other places where you can get even more info. Here's another chart from the California Ocean Protection Council, from the OPC, from Rising Seas in California, was the science report that the OPC put together last year, and some explanation of that. Here's the kind of thing, I'm not sure some of you will like this, some may not, and we can give you some quotes from places or studies. And so here's an example from Davis Wells' new book, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming, where he talks about uncertainty in a very nice and clear way. And on this slide, how much uncertainty there is in all of our projections going forward. And then on the second slide, why sea level rise has even more uncertainty. So it's a bit of thinking here that could help you in discussing sea level rise and discussing those charts that we just had. And so that's an example, again, of kind of background material that we could provide if it was helpful to you. Emerging themes is another. I'm just going to run through all this, and then we'll get to your questions and comments and all. Emerging themes is another way that we can present the material, not just by temperature, by sea level rise. So here's the theme. We have 3 that we're going to show you here today. One is that the things we're doing now to cut carbon pollution, things we're going to do in the next decade or 2, have a chance to make a significant difference in terms of what happens here in the Bay Area in terms of climate impacts after mid-century. There's enough baked in warming right now in the system, mainly in the oceans, we're already set on a course, and you can see that from some of the slides that I'll show in a second, through about 2050 or so. But where we really will make a difference, what we do globally about reducing emissions will come in the second half of the century. And that's an important point to make to people. in these kinds of presentations because we need them to see that it's not just one future, one terrible future that we're going to have, but there are some multiple option futures ahead of us eventually, and what we do now will make a huge difference for some of us and for our children and grandchildren. So here are some examples of those graphs, again, from the report that illustrate this divergence of different scenarios after kind of mid-century in terms of sea level rise, in terms of temperature, in terms of precipitation, hottest day of the year, all sorts of things. Here's a second theme. While we're all going to be and are affected now by climate impacts in the Bay Area, vulnerable populations and communities will certainly be hit harder and in many cases and have a much tougher time in recovery. So we reference now the climate justice report that was done for the fourth assessment and some of our material in the Bay Area region report. And again, kind of text heavy here, but something like this that might be helpful for your discussion of climate justice and environmental justice issues around climate. Here is the kind of lead quote statement from the Climate Justice Working Group that the state put together last year, defining the issue. Here's another one pulled from the Climate Justice Report. Just what is this notion of climate justice, and how did that report and that working group, those two different efforts, approach the issue and define it. Here is something else from the fourth assessment report on climate justice, kind of defining what we mean when we talk about climate vulnerability and what are the factors that go into that. So we can do, again, slide packages around these kinds of topics. Here's an example of research that was done for the Bay Area and 3 other regions, illustrating kind of differences between lower income and medium and higher income neighborhoods in terms of what we're dealing with climate impacts and preparing ourselves. And these were about impervious hard surfaces that reflect more heat and heat up neighborhoods, and tree canopy, which can tend to cool neighborhoods, and the difference between these higher, medium, and lower income areas from the research. And here's one more, where we've looked in this study, it was done by Pacific Institute a while back, looked at certain factors that contribute to social vulnerability and then graphed those after giving each census tract a score to graph those over sea level rise projected for, in this case, Oakland and Alameda, and tried to see where the overlap between sea level rise risk and high vulnerability, social vulnerability communities. Third theme, last one of the 3, land use decisions are going to be critical, as you know, to how able or not able we are to deal with climate impacts here in the region. It's a theme that's throughout the Bay Area region report, and here are some, again, illustrations of that, of where we put the next 1 million people in the Bay Area, what kind of land use and housing patterns we have will have a lot to do with how we do with sea level rise. Are we putting people in riskier areas or not? It also will have to do with temperature, as we have such a gradient here in temperature, and some areas use more water and more air conditioning, more electricity. Are we going to put 1 million people in hotter areas or in cooler areas? And same with fire risk. Are we going to put more people in areas which we know are going to have higher fire risk or not? So land use, locally controlled, is going to be a huge issue, and these slides illustrate, kind of bring that home for why climate and land use and housing are so woven together so intimately. And finally, various solutions here. We've given you a lot of stuff on the problems and the science behind it, but we can also put together slides like this that start to show a lot of the cool work that you all and others are doing, and highlighting some of the big things like Measure AA and the Resilient by Design Bay Area Challenge, some of the research that's going on at Berkeley and elsewhere. So we can certainly do a lot, and we've only got a few examples here on solutions. And finally, images. We could just give you images that you could use. I mean, you can obviously take our images out of those other slides. You don't have to, again, use our slide. Just be accurate with what how you're using the material. But we could also just give you images without text and all, things that you could throw into shows that might be helpful. And here's the last group of those. So that was a bit of a long presentation, but I hope you stuck with me. And we have about 30 people on the call right now, so I'd like to open it up and see just comments here. You know, what's most helpful to you? Would it be kind of summary slides or more specific things going more in depth about issues like temperature and sea level rise and all? Would it be more to illustrate themes like we showed you, or more about solutions? What would be most helpful that we could do in terms of, you know, going from V1.0 to V1.1 in the next few weeks here? This will be 1.0. So you can use the chat function on your screen from GoToMeeting, or you can also unmute yourself, and we can go from there, and we can just identify yourself for the group and make your comment or pose your question. So I will open it up for now and ask you to be polite, but unmute yourself and tell us what you like of what you've seen or what you'd like more of that's here, or ask a question.
Hi, Bruce, this is Alice Tui from East Bay Mud. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great, hi. Thanks for doing this webinar and putting these slides together. I think for us, the things that are really helpful are, well, two things. Things that sort of provide is kind of statewide context. That is to say, you know, we have a lot of our own data sets about snowpack and temperature and the changes we're seeing, but some of those earlier summary slides that from the fourth assessment report that kind of help us put that into context and kind of validate what we're seeing, I think that's really helpful. I also really am interested in the solutions-oriented slides. I think that's something that, you know, would be really helpful for us, you know, just in terms of when we're talking about this and, you know, giving our electeds or our members of the public more of a sense of, you know, what we can actually do.
Great, thank you. That's just what we need to hear. You know, and obviously it's going to vary from organization to organization, but give us your feedback on what would be most helpful to you. What would you like to see? What did you like here? And what would you like to see more of? Don't be shy, folks.
Hi, this is Marcus Griswold from the County of San Mateo. Thanks for putting this together. I just think from my perspective, there's a lot of really interesting studies going on and you know, going beyond the fourth assessment. You know, I see Christina's on the line, but you know, Christina's groundwater study, there's a lot of work going around diving deeper into the fog issue, which is I think a good question around water supply and climate change. So I think like one thing that might be beneficial for us is to have a group that's on top of the current science, even science that hasn't been published yet, and really helping us interpret that and use it at a local level. And then I think going to that point again is really understanding what are the key areas that we should be looking at the local level that might not be in the media yet or might not be in these, you know, conferences yet. So sort of looking out farther and thinking about what are the risks that we're not seeing yet.
Excellent. Good. That's very helpful, and that'll also be helpful for the broader discussion we have on the second agenda item here in terms of you know, providing more climate services and guidance and all. As I said, the slide deck's kind of a start on that for BayCAN. Yeah. So thank you very much. That's helpful. Others, what would you like? What would you like more of? What would be most helpful to you? Were these things all kind of run of the mill for what you're doing? You need something deeper or something bigger? So fire away.
Hi, Bruce. Carolyn Blady, Alameda County. Can you hear me?
Hi, Carolyn. Yes.
Hey, so one thing that I would love to have, and thank you for doing this because this is going to be very helpful, is high quality images that show local impacts and also just, shorter time frame impacts. 2050 is always a long way out. A lot of the people we're talking to are going to be retired by then. So something that sort of backs it all up to where we are today, and and really having great pictures like of the wildfire smoke that we had last fall, things that really resonate, that people can wrap their head around, that isn't so huge and so overwhelming. I mean, we want to have the broader context, but something like that would be helpful. And then just, sort of bringing it to life, to like the kind of actions that we can actually take. I think for myself and others, there's so much we could do on so many fronts, and where can we narrow our efforts and really advance some work. Thank you.
Good, excellent. Thank you, Carolyn. And certainly that idea of focus on things that are happening already. So things that are going to be happening in the near term, because they're here and on us, that we are warmer, we are having more intense fires, those kinds of things. Great, very good message. Who's next? You can use the chat function if you're shy, and you can leave us a message there. You can email me as well at bruce@baycanadapt.org, but the floor is yours.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise behind you, but try it again.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yesterday I was making a presentation to a Rotary group.
Hold on.
I'll call you on the phone.
Okay, that'll probably work better. Someone else while we're waiting for the mystery caller to call in. Floor is yours.
Hi.
Okay, go ahead, whoever's got the floor here. We hear you, so someone, there were a couple of people there that wanted to speak up. Yikes, that's a lot of background noise I'm sorry for whoever that is. I can't tell from the connection. Somebody else had a clearer audio. Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Katie in Berkeley. Thanks so much, Bruce and the team, for putting this together. This is really helpful. I think, kind of to echo something that I heard earlier, I think what would also be helpful is, I think you lay out the science really well, which is great, but putting a little focus on some of the solutions that are already happening or helping, so that we can try and focus people on what we can do. And then another piece is that I like that we touched on equity, but if we do start focusing a little bit more on the solution side, just making sure that we incorporate equity into the solutions as well.
Great. Thank you, Katie. That's a good question for all of you, anyone that wants to weigh in, whatever your other comments are. But on this notion of, a lot of what we showed you was the science and the problem and the projections on that, and how serious it is. We can obviously do a lot more on solutions, but if you had to pick which would be more helpful to you, that'd be interesting to hear. So floor is open. Just unmute yourself and fire away at us. Who would like to be next? Floor is yours. Comments, questions? Is the level of detail that we gave you on that we're giving you on the notes for each of the slides that we showed here as we went through it, trying to give you enough background but not too much that you have to stay up till 3 in the morning figuring it out. Is the level of background seem about right for, I know this is the first time you've been seeing this? Go ahead.
Bruce, Carolyn Blady again. Are there any thoughts on somebody outside of our organizations coming in and giving a talk? Because sometimes sort of the new face or the expert or somebody coming in can be more powerful than those of us who have been speaking to our internal groups over and over.
No, that's good. Good question. Well, it's certainly something we've done a bit of with BayCAN, and others have. CRI's done some stuff on this, where we would do webinars and maybe in person, where we bring the experts right to the audience, as opposed to, in this case, we're providing slides. But we're trying to augment that, because we know that we can't do everything and can't be everywhere, and the experts have limited time as well. So in addition to webinars and workshops, as you described, what we're trying to do here is to augment that with slides so that you all can or someone in your shop can give a talk, or extend the reach, I would say. Take Mark Stacy's research, and Mark is a good example because he's been out talking to different groups about the work that they're doing at Berkeley, about the interdependence of our cities, particularly around sea level rise, and why we have to be working more together. Mark's taken that out, but there are limits to his time, and so that's why we thought if we can put together, say, some slides from his work and give you enough background to go with it, that we can multiply the number of people that are out there spreading the word. Other comments or questions before we move to the second discussion, which is going to be a little broader on this kind of climate services or extension services? Other comments or questions about the slide deck?
Bruce, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, perfectly. Yes.
Okay, this is Jack Webster. I'm noting a couple of things in the chat area that maybe you haven't taken a look at, and there's some questions there. Mine is that I was presenting to a group of Rotary yesterday, and I put up the slide about projections of sea level rise, referring to RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5, and I was desperately hoping nobody would ask me to explain those. So that might be something. I saw you had something in the explanation, but putting them in more terms like this is if we continue on our current path of putting out greenhouse gases, and RP 8.5 is if we increase, or something like that. That would be easier to interpret that slide with. Good.
Great. No, that's perfect, Jack. And I've had the same experience. I'm pretty good on 4.5 and 8.5 now myself. It took a while, and you're just hoping nobody nails you from the back. But that's, again, what we're trying to do here, seriously, is give you enough that you can work with and be comfortable presenting slides on various parts of the science. Jack, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I did. On a larger scope, I very much agree with the person who mentioned focusing on the local impacts in the near term. And in that regard, something that would get across the idea that we need to start now in order to anticipate the changes down the line. Like if we're going to reorient the highway system or elevate highways or something, there's a long lead time. Or we're going to move a wastewater treatment plant. There's an amazingly long lead time for that to happen. You have to, come to the decision that you're going to do it, raise the funds, construction period, environmental clearances, all that kind of thing, to show that we just can't turn on a dime on this stuff. And perhaps there's an example, like not the Bay Bridge, but an example of an infrastructure project that we could point to that shows that we got to get started soon.
Good. Great. Those are the kinds of things we can pull out as kind of themes. There could be a couple of different illustrations there. Thanks, Jack. A couple from the chat function. Emily says, I might have missed this, but including projects and approaches from Bay Area governments would be helpful to encourage keeping up, in quotes, with others. Yes, that'd be really something that we could provide more solution slides again to show, because that is a powerful kind of thing with elected officials and others, that they may feel that their city or areas is not keeping up, and to inspire them with what people are doing. Herb writes, echoing desire for more examples about types of actionable solutions, including measures being taken in other regions. Okay, that'd be interesting too, that we could, we focused here on Bay Area, but we could certainly do some slideshow stuff around sea level rise for what they're doing in San Diego region, which is quite a bit right now, or what they're doing in the Central Coast or the Los Angeles region, or certainly from other parts of the world even. Yes, and estimates of cost of inaction is another from Emily, would be helpful. So good. These are the kinds of things we need to hear from you so that we can, version V 1.1 can have some of these slides added to the deck. Other comments here or questions, things you like, things you'd like to see more of?
I'll add one. This is David PR in San Francisco. Bruce, I think that a nice thing to add to the information that's provided, I can't remember everything on all of the slides, but is a bit of a caution that overall estimates of temperature, even sea level rise for the state as a whole have to be put in a local context, meaning what kind of local manifestation will that bring? I think other people are making a similar point, and I think it transitions a little bit to the climate services argument. But warming will be different in the coastal area than in the hot inland area, and storm surge will play out differently in different parts of San Francisco Bay, and the nature of long-term sea level rise might be differently cause different levels of vulnerability in different locations. So some sense that you take this information and then have to put a little time at least into understanding what its meaning is locally in your watershed or in your local area is going to be, I think, valuable and important.
Good, very helpful, David. And that's a good example that we're not trying here with BayCAN to give you a slideshow that you will go out and present. We're giving you slides because that's what we heard from the feedback when we asked this question last year when we started BayCAN, was give us slides so that we can pick and choose which things we need, whether we want to go into more detail on something, whether we want to stay at a high level, those various things. Who's next on a comment or a question here?
This is Anne Krelock at Sonoma Water. Can you hear me?
Hi, Anne. Yes.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thanks so much for putting these together. They look really good. And I really love that you put references and page numbers in the notes there so that we could look up more detail and have a better ability to explain what you're talking about. I wanted to echo, images of local impacts would be really great. Maybe a call out to the agencies who are members to provide some images that could be used in these slide decks. And then I wonder if a couple of slides on different, issues specific to different sectors might be useful, like one related to public health, something related to water supply, wastewater, transportation, energy, some of those things might be a good addition.
No, that's very good. That's helpful. In the Bay Area Region report, there's a whole science section, and that's what these slides have been drawn from. But there's another half of the report that's what does this mean for Bay Area water supplies? What does the science mean for public health? What does it mean for ecosystems damage? So we had fewer slides for whatever reason. There were fewer images in that section of the regional report. But I hear you, getting a number of those, because that's what people want to see. Is the science is one thing, but it's like what Davis Wells says in his new book, The Uninhabitable Earth. He says this is not a science book. This is a book about what's happening and what is going to happen to us. And so making that real, making it more about things that we know and love in the Bay Area. That's great.
But it's great too that you are putting these together so that we're all on message and we're providing similar content around the Bay Area. I think that's really huge. So thanks for doing that.
Good. You're welcome. Maureen writes on the chat function, I think we need to put the dreaded R word on a slide. It's retreat. That some communities are already contemplating, some have already done in the middle of this country, in Mississippi, also New Orleans, and highlight governance structures that we may need to begin framing up for the problem that needs much more collaboration than we have right now. Good, great. We can certainly, again, we could provide some things on retreat or manage retreat or whatever people want to call it. I've heard a lot of terrible different versions of what to call retreat, but we could put those slides together and then you're making the choice as to whether you want to use them or not. Who else got a comment or question? A couple more minutes here and then we'll switch to the second item. Marcus has a good comment here on the chat function. Helpful to have some slides that align an impact with solution types so that we can tell more of a story there, which is, I think, another great way that this could be done. Either we can put those narratives together or we can give you the slides and you can put the narratives together, but something so that you can do that or we can do that easily. It's good. This is storytelling, so this is, I will admit, version V 1.0 is pretty, I won't say clunky, but it's not very slick, and it's not much of a story at this point. And that's what you need to create with presentations like this. Now, other comments? Final? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Bruce. This is Gilly with Cupertino. I'm just kind of scanning the comments and trying to put all this together in my mind. And I think that what would help me to get my head around this is to have some type of timeline as well. I've sat in on some discussions on, I think it's called trigger point analysis or threshold analysis. I can remember the word for it, but I really like the idea of having, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z for this amount of time, and once we reach this threshold, we're going to reassess and go this direction. Maybe start organizing some of the solutions around timelines as well. I think would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Good. I think that'd be another interesting, storyline, and that goes with a couple of the comments made earlier about, in one case, focusing on near term rather than on 2050 or towards 2100 or whatever. Good. This is just the kind of feedback we want because we're here to serve you. BayCAN is by and for local governments, so we're here to help you that are doing the real work, cities, counties, water districts, special districts, and all. Other comments? Last call on this item for now. It's never the last call. Okay, let's thank you very much for that. Very helpful, and you can continue to send emails to me that I'll look at afterwards and incorporate into the record of what you liked, what you didn't like, or you can use the chat function as long as we're on the call here. And we will compile and record all of those as well. So let's go to the second item on the agenda, which is some notion of climate services or extension services. We've had this discussion some with you with BayCAN in terms of BayCAN asking what would be most helpful to helping your program move ahead. And you saw, like at our last meeting, we worked on climate justice. We worked on mainstreaming across departments. We worked on risk. We worked on topics that you had nominated at various points. This climate extension services would take it a bit further. Thank you for muting your phones. That would become more of a formal service in the Bay Area, like maybe cooperative extension that's existed for 100 years based at the university, where there'd be this two-way kind of street, and not just about slides and maybe workshops, but playing kind of a broker and go-between, maybe arbiter, between scientists and all of you, and between experts on various topics and all of you, so that you're not having to read, 14 different scientific studies every week, but the climate extension service agent, if we can call them that, would do that kind of work and would link you with, like we're doing with the slides, summaries, or link you with the experts so you can ask questions to understand the study better, provide guidance on research so it just doesn't just get thrown at you, but how do we interpret and guide you in proper use of the science. This climate services function could function as a leader on research. Someone's got their phone off of mute. And you're walking, I think. Thank you. There could be workshop conveners. There are a whole series of services that we could do. It's beyond right now what BayCAN can do. We can do a bit of this, and there are others. BCDC is helping cities. The Coastal Conservancy is helping in terms of sea level rise. SFEI and others. I mean, there are a number of the clearinghouse at the state. There are a number of resources, but they're not formed at this point into much of a coordinated or aligned structure. So it's a question we've asked you in a certain way before, but just want to get some feedback. Would this kind of more formal program with some dedicated staff, or maybe staff at some different places that were coordinated by BayCAN or coordinated by somebody else, be a little bit helpful to you in your work, be somewhat helpful, or be very helpful? How helpful would this kind of climate extension services and kind of broker for all the information and science work that's out there be helpful to you? So a couple of questions here. Would it be helpful? How helpful? What roles would be most helpful to you? And your ideas, because we're starting to think through this about where this could be housed, maybe how could it be funded. There have probably been 6 or 7 conversations I've been a part of in different places on campus at the university and off campus at various places where people are thinking about this. So with all of that, give us your feedback on those couple of questions that are on the screen.
So Bruce, Carolyn's Lady, Alameda County. So
Yes.
When I think about just sort of our, our climate journey, there's a few aspects, as a doer and implementer that I could use help with, and so there is this aspect of consolidating all of that science, and sort of all this information, and then distilling out, where are you going to put your limited resources for focus. So the ability to take this and do priority setting, as far as sort of what do we need to do more near term, what might we do that's more long term, And then as a government employee, and I'm sure others experience this, the procurement process of then, bringing somebody on to actually help us, develop sort of climate plan 2.0 or, whatever this thing is, that we're moving to next. What would I even use for the RFP language? Like, what's the focus? What are the deliverables? Mm-hmm. Who are those stable consulting resources that are out there? Are there other RFPs that have already been issued that are publicly bid that I could piggyback off on, instead of actually doing the whole thing myself, and then sort of, getting to a point where we have this next thing where we know specific actions that we're going to take. So sort of help, through that, and, maybe there's various mechanisms or services that could help with that process. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Carolyn. Very helpful. Who's next? It's a big question.
Jack again.
A big set of questions. Go ahead, Jack.
The big question, and it is a big thing. There are a lot of different nodes, centers of information, and very little that connects them in a logical way. So even though it would be something beyond the Bay Area, it would be great if someone could turn those independent nodes into a functioning network where perhaps different places would have particular specialties, like, the universities doing science and interpretation, some local governments doing implementation, and sort of knit that whole thing together, because I always feel like I'm chasing after trying to find the best information. And even if I know a lot of different places to go, I don't know how to get that as efficiently as I could. And so I wind up not doing it because it's just too much trouble to run it down. So something that opens all those resources up to us in an easy to access fashion would be a godsend.
Great. Thank you, Jack. Thanks. This is, what we and others, BayCAN's not the only one thinking about this or talking about it at this point, but how do you take all of the, as Jack said, information that's out there, just start with that and coordinate it and analyze it, synthesize it so that it can be useful to you. It's, again, the slide deck is a fairly small way that we're seeing that we could do that right now, and keep you from hunting for slides or hunting for science on this topic or another for specifically doing presentations. But the bigger question of that kind of science and social sciences, as well as hard science and all, governance and funding and all those issues, that we would somehow help you with those in terms of assessments and plans and project implementation on a bigger scale. Who else would like to weigh in on this question?
I'd like to add to what Jack was saying. This is David Behar again, and I think that there is, and Bruce, we've talked about this a bunch of times, and I've probably talked to others about it as well. There's a lot of interpretations of what climate services really is or what it should be. One definition that has been, I think, kind of lacking is the idea that a climate service provides information. That's not enough. I think that in a world where local context is extremely meaningful and can influence the types of solutions that are sought, as well as the types of vulnerabilities that are being addressed, that some kind of relationship building over time between entities and climate service operations is essential. It both can help with interpretation of what information is saying, because there's always going to be contradictory information out there, and there's no correct or incorrect piece of information necessarily in a lot of applications. And then also the relationship building between a climate service entity and potentially even leaders in the or folks who work in the climate service entity and the local jurisdiction, county, city, whatever that's has a problem or set of problems it's working on can be extremely valuable over time. Most successful climate service operations have those relationships and create the stability whereby an entity or even groups of entities can have these relationships over time that they can leverage, especially given the ambiguity of current information, and then of course the fact that the information is going to change in a couple of years anyway. So it's the most labor intensive, the most difficult part of a climate service realization, but in a lot of ways I think one of the most important.
Thank you, David. Yes, and another point here is that we see this, and this is the way cooperative extension has worked in agriculture in the state for literally a century, is that it's a two-way street. And so you're not just bringing things to local governments in this case, you are bringing things back from local governments, new ideas, new questions, new approaches, and you're bringing that back to kind of the hub and then dispensing that information out to the network. This is not about someone sitting on campus or in an office figuring out what you all need to develop projects and to make the right choices and to move ahead in an accelerated fashion like we have to. We see it as very much a partnership here, very much a relationship, so that we are learning, the hub is learning, and just from all of you and the great work you're doing, and bringing that learning and that experience then to others in an efficient manner. Other comments on this, or you see some of the simple prompts on the screen. Science provider, would that be helpful? Guidance and interpretation, we're always told. Arbiter of which science to use. Leader of research projects, all of that. And again, I want to stress there are a number of groups that have been doing some of this in the region and in California. It's not that there's nobody working in this space, but we're trying to understand how this would fit into the hierarchy of your needs. Are your needs really at the city and county and water district and special district level primarily right now funding, and you need funding, you know what you need to do, or how important is this whole notion of having this kind of assistance as you're moving forward?
I think, David, again, I think that the climate service enterprise is going to be most useful at vulnerability assessment. At some point, it'll probably get into adaptation planning, but a lot of that is very engineering and land use focused, and there will be good examples of that will start to multiply over time. But I think the first goal of a climate service operation is to help local entities understand what it is they're responding to. And I also want to add that we've been talking a lot about how it's really important that local folks get quality information developed over time. I also think that a climate service operation can also manage up to a broader level, potentially a state level, wherein you get a lot of interactions between local government decision making and the state of the science. That dynamic and those iterations that are pretty complicated, but really what's going to determine what adaptation happens in a lot of ways, can also inform state policy in a really useful way, because state government has a certain amount of jurisdiction over adaptation decisions, but much of it is not happening at a state level, it's happening at a local level. And so the more we get local folks working with a climate service enterprise that helps us understand our vulnerabilities and then respond to them, the more those lessons can be taught upward at a state level. And I think on sea level rise, we particularly need that because right now we have state guidance that's somewhat ambiguous and is subject to a lot of interpretation. And I think that the way that that happens at a local level can be informative about how that guidance gets implemented rather than just waiting for the regulators to decide.
Right. Thank you, David. Anyone else? Final comments on this? We're edging into your lunch hour here, so I think we're going to wrap up in a minute. But any final comments on this whole notion of developing a more formal and rather extensive climate extension services, climate services for the Bay Area? Okay. Well, thank you. You can certainly send us email comments when you have them later this afternoon, and we'll put them in the hopper. We will also take now into account your great feedback on the B 1.0 on the slide deck, and we will make that available probably within about a week. The first version with some tweaks to it, and then start looking at the regular updating, which will probably happen on a monthly basis. But we'll have a notice to you as to where this will be on the BayCAN website, and we hope you're all or will soon be signed up for the member services, the members only part of our BayCANAdapt.org. So thank you very much for being with us today. We've been talking about the BayCAN Slide Deck and this notion of Bay Area climate services. We appreciate you giving us your time, and we look forward to you working with you over the coming months and hopefully years. So thank you for being with us, and this closes the BayCAN webinar number 3 for April 9th, 2019. Thank you. Have a great day.